Layla tried to curse, but his hands held her tight, as if he would not let her go. Every move he made was one of possession, an uncontrollable desire. His lips brushed her forehead, then moved down to her cheek. His warm breath melted her reason. Hello everyone, welcome to our channel, where we will bring you the most interesting and dramatic stories in life. It will take the audience from one surprise to another. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any episodes. If you love Jane, you can go to the playlist to find Jane's other channels. In today's video, we will bring you the story Layla's Father-in-Law. Please follow along. Layla, a simple country girl, grew up in a peaceful village surrounded by green fields. As the daughter of a poor farming family, Layla was accustomed to hard work from a young age. Her hands gradually became rough from the hoe and plough. But on the contrary, she has a pure soul and a gentle, natural beauty. As a country girl, Layla has a rustic beauty that makes everyone turn to look. When she met Kai, her current husband, Layla thought she had met the ideal man. Kai was a few years older than Layla, calm and mature. At that time, Kai came back from the city to visit his hometown, met Layla, and was immediately attracted by her gentleness and kindness. Everything happened so fast and almost fateful. Less than a year later, Layla left the house where she grew up, followed her husband to become the daughter-in-law of Mr. Michael. But contrary to the romantic image she had dreamed of, life as a daughter-in-law was not as simple as she thought. Mr. Michael's family was not large, but Mr. Michael had almost absolute power in the house. Since Kai's mother passed away, Mr. Michael lived alone, with a strict and serious personality. He was a typical man of the old generation, patriarchal and conservative. He always demanded that everyone in the house obey his will, regardless of the feelings of others, including his son. Despite living under the pressure of her father-in-law's strict and rigid rules, Layla still tries to fulfill her duties. She spends all day working in the kitchen, taking care of everything from meals to cleaning, just hoping to bring happiness and peace to her family. But gradually, Layla realizes that in this house, her role is not as important as she expected, and the feeling of isolation in the house that she hoped would be her home is gradually enveloping her. One hot summer day, Layla was busy preparing dinner. She had just put the plate of stir-fried vegetables on the table when she heard Mr. Michael enter the dining room. He sat down at the table, watching Layla's every move without taking his eyes off her. The atmosphere in the kitchen suddenly became stifling. Her husband was busy with work, and the baby was sleeping in the room, leaving only her and Mr. Michael sitting and eating. "I'd like to invite you to dinner, Dad," Layla bowed politely. "Well, she's a good girl," Michael replied, his eyes seeming to brighten as he looked at Layla. "Kai is lucky to have you too." Layla could only smile back, but she felt something uneasy inside. As she turned away, Mr. Michael's eyes followed her, as if he couldn't take his eyes off her slim, soft figure in her thin, sweat-soaked t-shirt. As time passed, Layla gradually realized that Mr. Michael's eyes were no longer just the concern of a father-in-law. He increasingly had strange expressions that Layla could not explain, but she still tried to keep her distance. However, his gestures and words gradually became haunting to her. That day, after dinner, Layla finished cleaning the kitchen and was about to go to the bathroom when Mr. Michael called her. "Layla, make some medicine for Dad. He's a bit tired today." His voice rang out from the living room. "Yes, sir," Layla replied, although she felt a little tired after a long day. She quickly prepared the medicine and brought it to his room. When Layla stood in front of the door, she knocked softly. "Dad, I brought the medicine." "Come on in. I didn't lock the door," said Mr. Michael. Layla opened the door softly and entered, placing the pot of medicine on the bedside table. Mr. Michael sat against the bed, staring at Layla. She felt a little uneasy but tried to keep calm. "Sit here for a moment." Mr. Michael pointed to a nearby chair. "Okay, let me go home and clean up," Layla replied softly, feeling hesitant. "Just sit here and talk to me for a bit," Michael continued, his voice gentle. "I don't have anyone to talk to in this house. Kai is always at work." Layla reluctantly sat down, trying to keep her distance from Mr. Michael. He lifted the pot of medicine to his mouth, but did not drink it right away. He looked at Layla for a long time, his eyes never leaving her face. "You know, since you came to this family, I feel like there is more life in this house," Mr. Michael said, his voice low. "Yes, thank you, Dad," Layla replied awkwardly, not knowing what else to say. "I'm not joking," Michael continued, his eyes never leaving Layla. "You're so beautiful, so gentle. Kai is so lucky to have a wife like you." Layla bowed her head in confusion, her hands clasped together, feeling Mr. Michael's eyes still fixed on her. "Dad, I'm done taking my medicine, so I'll go out and clean up." Layla tried to find an excuse to leave, but as she stood up, Mr. Michael gently grabbed her wrist, holding her back. Layla was startled, her eyes widening in surprise. "Stay a little longer," he said softly, his eyes full of pleading. Layla stood still, confused by his actions. The atmosphere in the room became tense. She felt her heart pounding but still tried to stay calm. Layla sat back down on the chair, her heart filled with confusion. Just as she was about to pull her hand back, she felt Mr. Michael's hand still lightly gripping her wrist, a feeling that was both gentle and determined. His eyes looked at her intently, as if trying to search for something deep within her. His eyes. Each glance from her face to her fingers carried a strange concern that made her suddenly feel uncomfortable. "Don't be in such a hurry to leave," Mr. Michael's voice lowered, but his eyes did not let go. Those eyes, though trying to appear gentle, still had a look of longing, as if wanting to hold her with all their eyes. Layla felt uncomfortable. Her shoulders tensed involuntarily as if to defend herself. She tried to stay calm, but the heavy feeling in the space made it difficult for her to breathe. "I'm just lonely," he said softly, almost hauntingly. "Does anyone understand me?" Layla nodded, confused, not daring to look at him. She felt her hand tighten as if he didn't want to let her go, stirring up a vague sense of fear. She tried to pull her hand away again, but Michael held on tight, creating an invisible pressure that was like an unspoken request that made her even more confused and awkward. "Do you find me annoying?" Michael asked sadly. "I'm just a lonely old man who wants someone to talk to." "No, Dad, don't think like that. Layla stuttered, not knowing how to answer. She tried to gently pull her hand out of his, but he still held on tight. "Sit down with me for a moment," Michael insisted. "I'm not asking for anything too much, am I?" Layla didn't know what else to say, just sat down, not daring to look straight at him. She felt something was wrong with the way he looked at her, but didn't dare to protest for fear of offending him. "I know you're a good person, very gentle. I always feel very comfortable around you, Mr. Michael continued, his voice pouring into Layla's ears, making her feel more and more uncomfortable. In that moment, Layla suddenly realized that this was not just a father-in-law's concern for his daughter-in-law. Mr. Michael's eyes sparkled with something unusual that made her unable to help but feel worried. "Dad, take your medicine and go to bed early," Layla said, trying to keep her voice calm. She gently pulled her hand from his and stood up, bowed, and left the room. In the following days, Layla always felt uncomfortable around Mr. Michael. Whenever she had to get close to him, she always tried to keep her distance, but it seemed that Mr. Michael did not give her the chance. He often found reasons for her to stay by his side, and Layla felt more and more afraid of something that she could not name. That evening, as Layla finished cleaning up and was about to go to her room, she heard Michael calling from the living room. "Layla, come in here for a moment." Layla stopped, startled. She didn't know what he wanted, but she answered anyway, stepping gently into the living room, standing at a safe distance. "Yes. What do you need?" Michael leaned back in his chair, his face tired but his eyes bright. He gestured for Layla to come closer. "Sit here. I want to talk to you for a moment." "Yes." Layla hesitated, not wanting to get any closer to him, but under his gaze, she felt it was inconvenient to refuse. She had no choice but to sit down on the opposite chair. "You know," Michael began, his voice low, "since Kai's mother passed away, I've had almost no one to confide in except Kai, but he's distant from me. Sometimes I feel so lonely." Layla looked at him, feeling a little sorry. After all, Mr. Michael had lost his wife a long time ago and lived alone, but his eyes never left her, and a feeling of unease crept into her heart. I understand, Dad," she replied, keeping her voice gentle. "I also want to fulfill my duties in the family. I just hope that you will always be healthy." Mr. Michael smiled slightly, but it was not the pleasant smile that Layla was used to seeing on old people. There was something warm about his smile, but also something indescribable. "You're such a good girl, Layla," Michael said, his gaze no longer just that of a father to his daughter-in-law. "You know, you remind me of Kai's mother when she was young. You're as gentle and caring as she was." Layla blushed slightly, embarrassed by his compliment. She tried to smile back, but she couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling in her heart. "I'm old now, and I just want someone to be there to share with, to feel a little warmer," he continued, his voice gentle but full of meaning. "Can you understand that?" "Yes, I understand," Layla replied softly, but her eyes were averted. She felt that Michael's every word was hinting at something she had not yet thought of. Michael continued to look at her intently, his voice growing lower as if he wanted to prolong the moment. "Layla, don't be shy. Dad just wanted someone close to him. I see you always taking care of him every little bit." Layla sat there, clearly feeling every gesture and gaze of Mr. Michael. She could see his eyes still not leaving her face, and that made her feel like getting up and leaving immediately, but she didn't know how to handle it without offending him. "I'll go to my room. I have some work to do," Layla said softly, trying to find an excuse to leave the room. "Mister." Michael nodded slightly but said nothing more. When Layla stood up, he looked at her. His eyes seemed to want to capture her image in every movement, every step she took. Layla felt her chest tighten. She just wanted to leave the room quickly. When she got back to her room, Layla plopped down on the bed, her hands still shaking. She breathed a sigh of relief, but her heart was still uneasy. She didn't know how to get rid of this feeling. She had thought that although Mr. Michael was strict and difficult, he was still a respectable father-in-law, but now his actions and words made her question his true intentions. The next day, while Layla was busy cleaning the living room, Mr. Michael walked in again. He stood in the doorway, watching Layla bend over to wipe the table surface. Layla was startled to see him, but she smiled and said, "Dad, would you like some water? I'll make some tea." "Yes, make me a cup of tea," he replied, still watching her intently. His eyes never left Layla's slender figure as she walked toward the kitchen. Layla tried to keep her composure, making the tea and serving it to him. As she placed the cup on the table, Michael touched her hand, seemingly by accident, but it made her feel uneasy. He held her hand for a moment. "Thank you," he said softly, his eyes fixed on Layla. who did not dare to look up. "Nothing," Layla replied, trying to pull her hand away from his without seeming too hasty. But the touch of his hand on hers sent a jolt of electricity down her spine. "Mr.?" Michael kept smiling, his eyes sparkling with something deep. Layla quickly bowed her head and left the room, her heart pounding. When the door closed behind her, Layla sat on the floor, her arms wrapped around her chest, trying to calm herself down. Layla began to notice that Michael always found excuses to be near her whenever she was home alone. He often appeared in places she did not expect. She felt like she was always being watched. There was an invisible eye watching her every move. Another evening, as Layla was getting ready to go to her room, she heard Michael coughing in the bedroom. Unable to ignore it, she knocked on the door and entered to ask, "Are you feeling well, Dad? Let me get you some water," she said, her voice full of concern. Mr. Michael looked at her and nodded, his face showing his tiredness. "Yeah, I have a little sore throat, probably because of the weather," he replied. Layla quickly brought him a glass of water. When she handed it to him, he looked at her, his eyes softer than ever. Layla was a little shy, trying to smile back. "You are the only one in this house who cares about me like this," he said in a low voice. "Even Kai doesn't care about my health like you do." "It's my duty, Dad," Layla replied, but the feeling of unease welled up again. "You are such a good, obedient woman," he continued, his eyes filled with affection. "I thank my brother for having a daughter-in-law like you at home." Layla didn't know how to respond, so she just smiled softly and asked to leave. She felt bound by his eyes and words, and the fear in her heart grew. In the days that followed, Layla no longer felt safe in her own home. Mr. Michael seemed to appear whenever she was alone, whenever her husband was not around. His gaze became more and more intense, and Layla began to realize that she had to do something to protect herself. She thought about talking to Kai, but every time she was about to speak, she hesitated. Her husband had long since stopped caring about her feelings. Would he believe what she said? She also did not want to cause a rift in the family relationship just because of her own insecurities. Layla had to continue living with increasing anxiety and insecurity. She always tried to stay away from Mr. Michael, always tried to keep her distance, but it seemed that he intentionally created more opportunities to keep her away from him. Every day, Layla tried to avoid Mr. Michael's eyes and his accidental or intentional approaches, but each time she felt like she was falling into a trap, a closed space that she could not find a way out of. Mr. Michael always seemed to have a reason to be with her, always appearing in places she did not expect, making her never feel at peace. Layla told herself that this was not the life she had dreamed of when she married Kai. There was a time when she thought that her husband's family could be a place for her to build happiness, but now it had become an obsession. Whenever her husband Kai went to work, Michael would use that time to find an excuse to call Layla to stay, sometimes to do unnecessary chores. She tried to keep her distance, but it seemed that all her efforts were meaningless in the face of Michael's stubbornness. One evening, after finishing her chores in the kitchen, Layla stepped out onto the porch to breathe in the fresh air. She sat quietly, looking at the twinkling stars in the sky, feeling depressed and frustrated. At that moment, she heard Mr. Michael's footsteps approaching. She was startled, but tried to keep her composure and not let her fear show. "You're sitting here. Why don't you go inside and rest? It's late," Mr. Michael said, his voice even but full of hidden meaning. "Yes, I'll just sit out here for a bit." Layla tried to respond, not wanting to have any more conversation with Mr. Michael. She tried to keep her distance, but Mr. Michael came closer and sat down next to her. "Dad, you seem tired lately. Is there something wrong?" he asked, his eyes not leaving Layla. Layla just smiled awkwardly and shook her head. "No, Dad. It's probably just the hot weather. Mr. Michael looked at her intently. His eyes seemed to probe her every thought. Don't be shy to tell me. I always want you to feel comfortable living in this house. Layla tried to smile back, but her heart was filled with unease. Mr. Michael continued to sit next to her, not saying anything more, just silently looking at her with eyes that made her feel uncomfortable. She stood up, trying to find an excuse to leave her seat. I'll go inside first to clean up a few things, Layla said, and hurriedly walked inside, not daring to look back. That night, feeling like she was stuck in a vicious cycle with no way out, the loneliness, the anxiety, the sense of being threatened kept her from feeling at peace. She thought about talking to Kai about it, but knowing his personality, she knew that wouldn't change anything. One night, the house was quiet under the dim moonlight. Kai had gone away for work, leaving Layla alone in the quiet space. Layla lay on the bed, feeling the emptiness around her colder than usual, but did not know that in the darkness, someone had planned ahead. Michael stood outside Layla's door, silently watching through the crack in the door. He had been waiting for this opportunity for a long time, when Kai was away and Layla was alone. Slowly, he approached the door. He gently pushed the door open. The soft creak of the door opening echoed in the night, enough to erase the eerie silence. The bright moonlight shone through the window, creating magical shadows on the floor. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. The room was filled with the scent of jasmine, a gentle scent that made him feel relieved. Layla was curled up in her blanket, her delicate face reflected in the moonlight like a vivid painting. Her lips were pursed. Her beauty was like a dream he had never dared to imagine. In that moment he felt a strong desire rising in his heart. Kai was not home today, and this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. He moved closer to the edge of the bed, his eyes never leaving her. His hand trembled slightly as he touched Layla's long hair. The soft feeling was like an electric current running through him. He couldn't resist. He needed to see her closer. Suddenly, Layla turned, her eyes slowly opening. When she saw him, surprise and panic were evident on her face. "Dad, why are you here?" Her sleepy voice was somewhat worried, but also carried undeniable curiosity. "I'm sorry I snuck in," Michael said, his voice low but sincere. "I couldn't help but be drawn to you and lonely. I just wanted to be with you for a little while." Layla sat up, her eyes shining like stars, reflecting the turmoil inside her. "You know this isn't right?" she asked, but her voice wasn't angry, but rather as if seeking sympathy. "Right or wrong doesn't matter anymore," he replied, taking her soft hand in his. "What matters is that I feel alive again when I'm with you. You make me realize what I've been missing all my life." The air around them seemed to quiet down, leaving only the soft breathing of the two. Layla felt her heart beat faster. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, she couldn't take her eyes off him. "Dad, what do you want from me?" Layla asked, but her voice was sharp. "I want you," Michael whispered, his eyes hot and full of desire. "I want to feel every moment with you, these moments where everything is so wonderful." Layla shook her head, her heart in turmoil. She gently pushed him away, her eyes showing fierce resistance, but deep inside was an unconcealable weakness. No, Dad, this is wrong." However, Mr. Michael did not waver. He wrapped his arms around Layla's waist, pulling her closer. She resisted weakly, trying to push him away, but Mr. Michael's strength made it impossible for her to do much. Every time she struggled, he only hugged her tighter. His eyes seemed to bore into her soul, breaking all invisible boundaries. Layla gradually felt the strength from those hands, a strength that was both strong and gentle. Like a strong river washing away all resistance, She gradually succumbed, her heart no longer listening to reason. Mr. Michael stood right in front of her. His strong gaze seemed to penetrate her mind, breaking down all the barriers she had built. He gently but firmly lifted her chin, forcing Layla to look straight into his eyes. "Layla, do you know how long I've been waiting for this moment?" His voice was deep and warm. Each word seemed to penetrate deep into her heart, making Layla's reason even weaker. She gently pushed him away, trying to retain her last bit of self-control. No, Dad, we can't." But his hands held her shoulders tightly, a firm force that rendered all her resistance meaningless. Layla felt his warmth, a force like a waterfall that swept away all her weak will to resist. Layla tried to curse, but his hands held her tightly, as if not allowing her to escape. Every move he made was a clear demonstration of ownership, an uncontrollable desire. His lips lightly touched her forehead, then gradually moved down to her cheek. His warm breath melted all her reason. Layla was weak before his power. Her whole body seemed to have completely surrendered, no longer resisting. In that moment, all Layla could do was relax, let go of all thoughts of right and wrong, and let her emotions guide her. She closed her eyes as if in unconditional surrender. Mr. Michael's arms tightened even more, as if wanting to hold her forever. His breath filled this small space, drawing Layla into a storm of lustful emotions. Trapped in Mr. Michael's arms, Layla felt like there was no way back. She felt his breath covering her, enveloping her like a misty but enchanting curtain. The strength from his arms was both strong and firm, but hidden within it was a gentleness that she had never felt from anyone else. Even though she knew she shouldn't, Layla no longer had the strength to resist. She closed her eyes. All the thoughts in her head seemed to disappear into nothingness. She no longer thought about taboos, just pursed her lips and gritted her teeth to endure. "Mr." Michael lifted her chin, looking deep into Layla's eyes. There was no resistance in those eyes now, only calmness and acceptance. His gaze was gentle, but there was also determination in it, as if to tell her that she was his, and nothing could change that. "Layla, you know what I want." Michael's voice was low, both a question and a statement. His words seemed to sink into her mind, making any thoughts of resistance useless. Finally, as if she had no more strength to resist, Layla exhaled, her shoulders relaxing, her heart beating in sync with his strong rhythm. Michael pulled her closer, his warm breath covering her face, drawing her into his rough embrace. And what had to happen happened. When Layla's clothes slipped off, he couldn't help but admire her perfect beauty. He slowly took possession of that beauty for himself and acted with all his might. After nearly 2 hours, the storm of emotions subsided as everything calmed down. Layla sat quietly in the darkness of the room, a feeling of emptiness filling her soul. Her heart felt like it was breaking into pieces, the pain like a storm that made it difficult to breathe. She gently raised her trembling hands to cover her face, lifting her shoulders gently to the sound of Mr. Michael's heavy breathing. She felt like she was trapped in a dream with no way out. Layla looked up at the window, where the faint moonlight shone down, illuminating the quiet room. The light, though gentle, made her feel even smaller and weaker. She couldn't escape the truth, the guilt that was taking over her soul. The image of her husband appeared in her mind, making her heart ache even more. She felt like she had betrayed his trust, had broken the most delicate thing between them. Michael walked out of Layla's room, feeling a wave of joy wash over him. His heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a kind of satisfaction he had never felt before. He smiled slightly, his eyes shining with satisfaction as he thought about the heated moment. "I finally got what I wanted," he thought, his heart filled with joy as he imagined Layla's face, her eyes wet with emotion. Entering his room, He closed the door and leaned against it, breathing a sigh of relief. The air in the room seemed to hold the lingering echoes of passion. "I can't believe it happened," he thought, like a sudden wind blowing through his monotonous life. Layla sat on the edge of the bed, her heart pounding, her mind raging like a storm. Images of Kai suddenly appeared in her head, making her feel like 1,000 needles were stabbing her chest. She remembered his warm smile, the care he gave her, but right now the image of Mr. Michael interrupted, making all her thoughts chaotic. Did I betray Kai? The question echoed in her mind like an echo that never stopped. She had sworn to always be loyal to Kai, but now the cruel moments with Mr. Michael made her feel guilty. She wondered if she had become a woman unworthy of his love. The excitement and regret covered her like a thick fog. Layla looked into the mirror, her eyes filled with fear. "What have I done?" she asked herself, the torment in her heart growing stronger. Will Kai know? Will he be able to forgive her if he knows everything? Layla felt like she was standing at a crossroads. One side was Kai's love and forgiveness. The other side was shame and humiliation. She wondered if she could go back after what happened, or if everything had changed forever. She didn't know what to do, and the feeling of guilt haunted her like a ghost, not giving her a moment of peace. One morning, as Kai sat down to eat breakfast before leaving for work, Layla decided to speak up. She felt this was her chance to share with him what she was feeling, the anxiety and uncertainty of living in this house. "Kai," Layla called softly, looking at him hopefully, "I want to talk to you for a moment." Kai looked up, his eyes still unfocused as usual. He chewed slowly, pretending to listen, but not paying attention. "You know," Layla said, "I feel so lonely in this house. It seems like you never spend time with us." She hesitated, not knowing how to express what she was feeling. Kai kept his face indifferent. "I'm busy, Layla. You know that. Work isn't always easy. It's a lot of work all day." "But I really need your attention," Layla said, her voice laced with disappointment. "Can you spare some time to share with me?" Kai shook his head tiredly. "Layla, you have to understand my job. I'm not always free to be home. If there's something, just tell me." Layla felt sadness and loneliness rising in her heart. Her husband did not care about what she said, did not understand the insecurity she was suffering. Every day she tried to hold back her tears, not wanting to show her weakness. "It's nothing. I just wanted you to know," Layla replied, trying to keep her voice calm, then quietly turned away. In the following days, Layla realized that she could no longer stay in this house. She felt like she was imprisoned, without freedom, without the peace that she deserved. Especially every time she faced Mr. Michael. She could not help but worry about what he had done. She thought for a long time and began to plan to leave. In her mind, there was only the image of her son and the freedom that she had always longed for. She could no longer live in this anxiety and obsession. Layla decided that she would take her son out of the house, find a new place to live, and start over. She knew this was not easy, but she also understood that she had no other choice. She felt heartbroken to have to give up everything, but it was the only way for her to live peacefully and protect her son from the suffocating atmosphere of this house. The night before Layla left, she sat in her room, packing her bags and watching her son sleep soundly. She felt a sense of relief, a little sad, but also a sense of security knowing that she would be free from her obsession. She told herself that she would be strong enough to start over, no matter how difficult the road ahead was. At that moment, Layla heard footsteps coming from Laylag's hallway outside the door. She was startled, but tried to stay calm. The door opened, and Mr. Michael appeared, his eyes shining in the dim light. "Layla, aren't you asleep yet?" he asked, his voice even, but his eyes sparkled with something that Layla didn't want to look directly at. "I'm just getting some things ready. I'm leaving," Layla replied, her voice shaking. Mr. Michael walked in, looked around the room, then approached Layla. She felt like her heart was about to stop, but she couldn't back down. Mr. Michael sat down next to her, his eyes still fixed on Layla. "Are you going to leave?" he asked, his gaze becoming cold. Layla was stunned, not expecting that he had realized her intention. She didn't dare say anything, just bowed her head, her heart filled with worry and anxiety. Mr. Michael gently took her hand, his voice softening. "Layla, don't do that. Dad really needs you by his side, don't you understand?" Layla looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Dad, I can't stay here anymore. I really can't." But Mr. Michael did not let go of her hand. He held Layla's hand tightly, his eyes darkened. "You are the only one who makes me feel safe in this house. Don't go, Layla." Layla jerked her hand away, taking a step back. She felt fear wash over her, but also a determination stronger than ever. "Dad, I'm sorry, I can't stay here," Layla said firmly. She turned, hugging her son tightly, and prepared to leave the room. Layla stepped out of the house at dawn, her little boy in her arms. She knew it was a difficult decision, but it was the only choice. The house behind her, once her hope, was now a painful memory. Layla boarded the early morning bus, filled with hope for a life of freedom, where she and her son could be truly safe and happy. Ladies and gentlemen, our story today will stop here. If you find this story interesting, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment about your thoughts below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next interesting stories. And now, I would like to say goodbye, see you again in the next videos, wish you a wonderful day,